Alrighty, it's time for session number 6. We are kicking things off with the 251st ball. Shuffle everything out, get it nice and mixed up. And the 251st ball is number 209. Coming up next, we have 254. Next up is 147. And coming up next is 198. Coming up next is 240. Nice even number, that one. I like that one. Coming up next is 320. Yet again, another very clean, nice number. Coming up next is 236. And next up, we have 251. Next up, we have 376. Nice number. Next up is 341. And coming up next, we have 113. Next up is 203. Coming up next, we have 366. And coming up next is 365. That's how many days there are in a year. And coming up next, we have number 40. Whoa, dropped it, but it is 325. Coming up next is 229. And next up is number 71. And coming up next is number 108. Switching hands. Coming up next, we have number 66. That's a scary one. And coming up next, we have 238. The next number is 342. Next up, we have 396. And next up is 315. Coming up next is 332. Next up is 301. Coming up next is 233. Oh. Coming up next is 164. And next up is 235. Next up, we have 114. Next up is 334. And coming up next is 122. Coming up next is the luckiest number and my favorite, 7. This is a very good number. Next up is 160. Coming up next is 136. And up next, we have 28. The next one is 324. And our next number is 274. And next up is 67. Coming up next is 27. Another very lucky number. I like that one a lot. Next up is 353. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is the first palindrome of this session. Oh, followed up by the next palindrome of this session, 292. Fantastic, fantastic. You love to see it. Next up is 214. And coming up next, we have 95. And coming up next, we have 118. Our next number is 206. Next up, we have 378. Coming up next, we have 337. Fantastic. And next up, we have 123. 1, 2, 3. And finally, the 300th ball of losing count is ooh, number 21, the legal drinking age. Alrighty, congratulations to number 21.